Listen to me for a moment, not as a narrator, not as someone hiding behind history, but as a person sitting with you in the same quiet room. Take one slow breath and let your mind open a little wider than usual. Because what happened in Pernambuco in 1872 does not behave like an ordinary story. It comes toward you the way a cold wind slips through a half-open window, quietly, but with intention. Before I tell you his name, I need you to imagine something. Picture a boy, 11, maybe 12, whose footsteps were so light that even the sugarcane leaves barely trembled when he passed. Picture the way dawn looks when it hasn't fully made up its mind. Not dark, not bright, just a trembling line of gray stretching across the horizon. And now imagine this child standing inside that uncertain light, barefoot on soil still wet from a night's humidity, staring at fields so wide they could swallow a person whole. That was where the world first noticed him. Before they called him a criminal, before they called him a curse, before they blamed him for the flames. He was just a boy named Elias, and every adult around him believed he had been born already carrying someone else's grief. The Pernambuco of that time was not a place that breathed freely. It wheezed. It trembled under the weight of a system that demanded silence from those it chained. Enslaved children were expected to be invisible, shadows in sunlight, echoes in open fields. But Elias, he had something that frightened the men in charge. He watched everything, not with fear, not even with resentment, but with a quiet, sharpened awareness, the kind that made overseers shift uncomfortably when they caught him staring. Let me tell you what mornings were like for him. Before the rooster sang, before the state exhaled its first noise, Elias would walk alone between the cane rows, not because he wanted to, but because children like him started their labor before the sun even had the courage to rise. The dew soaked his legs, the air stung his chest, and the silence felt like a living thing pressed against his back. Now, put yourself there for a second. You, alone, in a corridor cane that towers above your head. The scent of raw earth, the echo of distant waves, the horizon that never seems to move closer. How would your heart behave? Fast? Careful? Would you feel small? Or would you feel like the world had finally shown its true size? This is where his story quietly sharpens. Because one of those mornings, the one no one could forget later, Elias noticed something unusual. A patch of cane had been cut jaggedly, not by him or by the others. A strip of dry leaves lay scattered across the soil, as if someone had run to the field in a panic. And near one of the posts, ashes. Tiny, almost invisible, but unmistakably ashes. At first, he thought it was just someone's forgotten ember from the night before. But then he crouched down, ran his fingers through black dust, and felt the warmth still trapped inside. Someone had been there. Someone who needed the dark more than the dawn. Someone who used fire as a companion instead of a tool. Elias didn't understand yet, but the land was already choosing him. Let me explain this carefully, because we live in a world where people forget that enslaved children had inner lives, fears, secret thoughts, suspicions they were never allowed to say out loud. When Elias found those ashes, he didn't gasp, he didn't scream. He simply stood still, listening to the wind. He knew that in Pernambuco, nothing stayed hidden for long. Not footprints, not whispers, not secrets carried in the smoke. And this brings us to the part that still makes historians uneasy. 3 nights before the Great Fire, the one that would turn him into a legend and a warning, some workers reported seeing a thin figure wandering near the cane dryers after midnight. Too small to be a full-grown man. Too silent to be someone unfamiliar with the land. Some swore it was Elias. Others swore it wasn't. The only thing everyone agreed on was that whoever was, they moved like someone with nothing left to lose. Now breathe with me, because what I'm about to tell you next is something most official records try to soften. Elias had begun to dream of flames. Not nightmares, not hallucinations, more like invitations. He said the fire called him as if it recognized him, as if it wanted to sit beside him the way children sit beside each other when the world gets too heavy. One of the older enslaved women, a woman known only as May Gilda, once whispered to him, "Fire doesn't destroy first, it remembers first." He never forgot that. And on the morning the overseer found him staring at that warm ash, something changed between them. The overseer, a man named Carvalho, didn't ask questions. He didn't shout. He simply grabbed the boy by the back of the neck and dragged him out of the cane row, muttering a sentence Elias would hear again and again. Kids who stare at ashes always end up causing trouble. The irony is, Carvalho had no idea how right he was. But let me pause here and ask you something honest. Have you ever felt a moment so clearly that you knew, without any proof, that it would divide your life into before and after? That's what this moment was for Elias. A quiet awakening, a shift in gravity, a breath that didn't feel like the one before it. Because the fire he would later unleash was not born from anger. It was born from something far more dangerous, understanding. And once you understand a place that wants to bury you, you also understand how to burn a path out of it. Before we step deeper into this, I want you to do something simple. Place yourself beside him, not as a distant spectator of history, not as someone trying to analyze what happened, but as a human being who knows what it feels like to wake up with more weight on your chest than you want to sleep with. Because that's what the night before the fire was like for Elias. Sleep didn't come to him softly. It crawled in pieces, like a tired animal. He'd close his eyes and feel the rumble of earth beneath the plantation. Open them again and the darkness felt too thick, too heavy, almost like it had hands. And every time he drifted toward rest, the same image returned. A trail of ember weaving through the cane fields, moving the way a snake glides across sand. Not random, not chaotic, purposeful. You know those dreams that are so vivid they follow you into waking life like a smell you can't wash off? That was his entire night. When the first hint of light appeared, barely a bruise of orange across the horizon, Elias got up. He had no reason to wake early. His work would begin soon enough. But something in him felt pulled, like the earth itself was gently hooking a finger into the fabric of his shirt and saying, "Come, it's time." He stepped outside. The sky was a soft gray blue, the kind of color that makes you feel like the world hasn't decided whether to forgive you or not. Mist clung to the ground. The cane leaves shivered with every breath of wind, and somewhere within that quiet, he heard it, a faint crackle. Not loud, not threatening, more like the tiny snap of a twig being stepped on by someone trying not to be heard. He froze. His heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up, a peculiar thing, something only children who grow up around danger ever learn how to do. Because fear can make you loud, but survival teaches you to become quiet in every possible way. He followed the sound. Left foot, right foot, slow breath, steady eyes. The silence around him felt alive, pressed close to him like a second skin. Then he saw it, a thin line of smoke rising between two rows of cane, so faint it could have been mistaken for morning mist if not for the way it twisted, like something was breathing beneath it. Elias crouched down. At eye level, the smoke became more obvious, and then he noticed the leaves, crisp at the edges, curling inward as if trying to protect their last bit of moisture. Something or someone had returned to that same spot where he had found the ashes before. And whatever had happened there had happened recently. He reached out and touched the soil. Warm again, this time warmer. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would become the one historians would starch into official reports, twisting it, manipulating it, reshaping it, so the boy always looked like the villain. But I want you to imagine him as he truly was. A child with fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from realization. A child who understood, long before anyone taught him, that fire is not just flame. It is message. It is defiance. It is a language spoken when all other languages are forbidden. And right there, as Elias stared at that small smoking stain on the ground, he understood something that adults on that plantation had spent years ignoring. Someone had been preparing the cane to burn. If you ever felt the hair on your arms rise because your instincts figured out a truth your mind hadn't caught up to yet, then you know what he felt. He stood up slowly, looked toward the horizon, and let out a breath so deep it sounded like the first sound he'd made in hours. That's when he saw Carvalho, the overseer. Carvalho was the kind of man who walked as if every step was meant to crush something smaller than him. Thick boots, heavy hands, a voice that didn't shout often because he didn't need to. Cruelty has a way of speaking without volume. Elias didn't move. Carvalho didn't slow down. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Carvalho saw a boy standing where no boy should be. Elias saw a man who would never believe a word he said. And in that instant, both of them understood. Today would not end peacefully. Carvalho grabbed him by the arm hard and dragged him toward the house. Elias didn't fight. He didn't cry out. He simply walked, letting the man pull him, his gaze still fixed on the smoke behind them. Always where trouble begins, aren't you? Carvalho muttered. His breath smelled like cane liquor and old rage. But the boy didn't respond, because his mind had already moved to something else, something heavier than the man's grip. He realized that whoever had been lighting these small, quiet fires wasn't finished, and whatever was coming next would be bigger, much bigger. Let me pause and ask you something you may not have considered before. How does a child become the center of a legend? Not by choice, almost never by desire. It happens when a moment of history grabs them without warning and refuses to let them go. That's what Dawn was doing to Elias, dragging him toward a fate he didn't fully understand. When they reached the courtyard, Carvalho shoved him against a wooden post. A few workers looked up. No one intervened, not because they didn't care, but because stepping between a boy and an overseer was a death sentence. Carvalho leaned close. "You see smoke before anyone else," he said. "You hear things no one else hears. That makes you dangerous." Elias swallowed, not out of fear, but out of something else, a strange, simmering clarity. He realized that the man was right. He was dangerous, but not for the reason Carvalho imagined. Because in that quiet courtyard, under that pale dawn sky, Elias began to understand the secret truth of the cane fields. They weren't alive. They were dried tinder disguised as crops, a forest of waiting fuel. And whoever controlled the fire controlled the fate of everyone who claimed to own them. Carvalho was still talking, threats, accusations, the usual script of a man who needed to feel powerful, when a worker suddenly ran into the courtyard, panting. "Smoke!" the man yelled. On the east side, Carvalho turned. Elias didn't. He simply closed his eyes, because he already knew he wasn't watching the fire. The fire was watching him. Before I take you into the fire itself, I want you to place your hand on your chest, literally or in your imagination, and feel something with me. Feel how your heartbeat changes when you know something is coming, but you can't see it yet. That trembling anticipation, that was the entire plantation at the moment the first real smoke rose. The workers shout, smoke, on the east side, hit the air like a stone tossed into still water. Conversation died. Tools dropped. Even the animals seemed to pause, ears tilting toward the same invisible threat. Carvalho released Elias's arm, but not out of mercy, out of instinct. Predators don't hold on to one prey when they sense something bigger approaching. He marched toward the cane rows, and the workers followed in uneven steps. Some walked fast, some walked slow, some didn't move at all. And then there was Elias. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He didn't even dust off the dirt on his knees. He simply started walking calmly, quietly, toward the smoke. The strange part? No one stopped him, because somewhere deep in their bones, the enslaved workers sensed something they could not name. The fire was connected to him, not as its cause, not as its victim, but as its witness. Let me make something clear. Cane fires don't begin politely. They start like whispers, thin, curious, flickering, and then explode with a hunger that seems impossible for something so small. When they reached the eastern row, the sky was already changing color. A thin column of smoke drifted upward, gray at the base, deepening to black at the top. The leaves nearest the ground glowed faintly orange, like the field was exhaling embers. Carvalho cursed under his breath. The workers looked at each other with wide eyes, knowing what this meant. A cane fire was not just a disaster. It was a sentence. Burned fields meant lost profit. Lost profit meant punishment. Punishment always traveled downward, toward the ones who had the least to do with the fire itself. Carvalho barked orders. Buckets! Rakes! Move! But the truth was evident even from a distance. The fire was moving too fast. The flames were climbing the stalks with unnatural speed, racing upward as though they had been waiting for this exact moment to be released. Elias stepped closer. The wind shifted, pushing the smoke sideways. For a brief second, he saw the core of the fire clearly, a twisting spine of flame weaving to the plants like a living creature. And then something impossible happened. The fire curved. Not in a random, chaotic way flames dance when wind pushes them, but in a deliberate arc, bending around the workers and heading deeper into the field, as though it knew exactly where it wanted to go. Carvalho's eyes widened. "Back!" he shouted. "It's too strong." But Elias didn't move, because what everyone else saw as disaster, he saw as recognition. It was the same pattern from his dream, the same serpentine path, the same strange softness at its edges, as if the flames were not burning randomly but choosing. A worker grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, but Elias whispered, "It's not after us." The man froze. Something in the boy's tone, a calmness too deep for his age, made the worker release him. Flames roared higher. The crackle turned into a howl. Smoke thickened, swirling upward like a dark veil shaken by invisible hands. Carvalho ran deeper into the field, foolishly trying to fight the blaze head-on. Workers shouted for him to stop, but his pride was louder than their warnings. And then, a breath of wind, sharper than a blade. The fire leapt. It crossed an entire row in a single flash, igniting a new section with terrifying precision. Carvalho stumbled, heat washing over him like a wall. For a moment, he was silhouetted inside an orange glow, a man dwarfed by the very land he thought he controlled. He screamed for help. No one moved, not because they didn't care, but because stepping into that fire meant choosing death. Elias watched him, not coldly, not with hatred, but with the stillness of someone witnessing something inevitable. Because in that moment, the fire revealed its truth. It was not random. It was not wild. It was aimed at the one man who had spent years punishing bodies as if pain were currency. Aimed at the overseer who believed nothing could touch him. Aimed at the only person on that land who deserved the fire's attention. And as the flames crawled closer to Carvalho, a strange calm settled over the field. Something ancient, older than plantation, older than the sugar itself, had awakened. A justice without words, a verdict without courts, a sentence delivered by heat instead of law. Carvalho tried to run, but the fire circled him. It moved like a closing hand, tightening slowly, deliberately, as though savoring its own inevitability. He screamed again. This time, even the birds did not answer. Elias took a step forward, not out of curiosity, but out of understanding. He whispered into the wind, "It chose you." No one heard him, but the fire did. A sudden burst of flame shot upward, engulfing a section of cane so violently that even the workers far behind staggered back. And in that instant, Carvalho disappeared behind a curtain of orange. The man who had made children kneel in the mud. The man who had broken bones like someone snapping sugarcane. The man who believed fear was the only language worth speaking. Was swallowed by the very land he thought belonged to him. Silence followed. Not peace, silence. A silence so thick it felt like the field was holding its breath. Elias closed his eyes. He knew this wasn't the end. Not even close. Because once a cane fire starts, it doesn't stop on its own. It grows. It hungers. It learns. And as the flame surged outward, stretching across rows and rows of sugar like an army of light, one truth became undeniable. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was a reckoning. And the boy standing at the edge of that inferno was no longer just a witness. He was becoming the center of the story the land had been waiting. When the fire finally reached the central rows of the plantation, time stopped behaving normally. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like a single burning breath. And in that strange suspension, Elias stood alone, close enough to feel the heat sting his skin, yet untouched by the panic spreading across the estate. Workers ran toward the wells. Women gathered children and fled toward the riverbank. Men shouted orders no one could follow. But Elias, he simply watched. Not mesmerized, anchored, as if everything inside him had settled into a single, undeniable truth. The fire wasn't destroying the fields. It was revealing them. The cane that once gleamed like sugar-coated gold now burned like dry bones, finally allowed to speak. Every crackle was a story that had been buried. Every burst of flame was a memory the land had tried to forget. And standing at the edge of it all, Elias understood something that no child should ever have to grasp. When a system is built on silence, the first real sound of justice will always come as fire. He walked alongside the burning rows, not running from the flames but pacing with them, almost as if they were in conversation. Each step he took seemed to echo the fire's rhythm, and the workers who looked at him saw something they wouldn't dare say out loud. He wasn't afraid. Maybe that's what unsettled them most. Not the fire, not the destruction, but the boy who walked through dawn as if he had always known it would burn. A few men whispered that he was protected by spirits. Others said he had been chosen by forces older than plantation. Some claimed he was the one who ignited everything. History would later twist itself into knots trying to find him. Savior, criminal, omen, curse. But none of those labels would ever capture the truth of that morning. Elias didn't start the fire. The fire started him. And once the flames had swallowed nearly half the field, the plantation owner arrived. His name was Coronel Duarte, a man known for wearing too much perfume and too little humanity. He rode his horse straight toward the inferno, face twisted with outrage, as if the fire itself had insulted his lineage. When he saw Carvalho's abandoned tools near the burned rows, he froze. What happened here? He demanded, but the workers stayed silent, not out of rebellion, out of fear that the wrong word would become a rope around their necks. Duarte dismounted. He spotted Elias standing alone, soot on his cheeks, eyes reflecting the orange horizon. "You," Duarte barked. "Come here." The boy didn't move. And something about that quiet defiance, that refusal to shrink, ignited a different kind of fury in the colonel. He stormed forward, grabbed Elias by the arm, and shook him. "What did you do?" The question was absurd. No child could have orchestrated a fire that moved like weather and struck like judgment. But Duarte needed someone to blame, and power always chooses the smallest target first. Elias finally spoke, his voice steady despite the man's grip. "I wasn't the one who lit it." "Liar," Duarte hissed. "The field was already waiting," Elias said softly. "You just didn't see it." Duarte struck him, hard. The workers gasped, but no one intervened. The plantation hierarchy was a cage with invisible bars. Stepping out of place meant risking your life. But then something unexpected happened. As Duarte raised his hand to strike Elias again, the wind shifted. A violent gust pushed the flame sideways, sending a wave of heat toward the colonel. So intense he stumbled back, shielding his face. It was as if the fire had snarled at him. A warning. He looked at Elias. For the first time that morning, Duarte stepped away from the boy instead of toward him, because in that moment, the colonel saw what everyone else had already sensed. The fire favored him. By late afternoon, the cane fields were gone, charred, collapsed. Blackened stalks stood like broken ribs across the land. The sun dipped low, turning the sky the color of dying embers. And then the judgment began. A makeshift tribunal was formed, the colonel his foreman, a priest to make it look moral. Elias was placed in the center of the courtyard, hands bound even though he hadn't tried to flee. Workers gathered around, their faces tense with fear and curiosity. Duarte paced in front of the boy, voice dripping with force authority. "You were seen near the fire." "I was near it," Elias replied, "but I didn't start it." "You dream of flames," Duarte snapped. "You walk into smoke as if it calls to you. What else am I supposed to believe?" Elias looked up at him, and for the first time, the boy's voice carried something sharp beneath its calm. "Believe what the fire showed you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Duarte slammed his fist onto a table. "This boy will be punished," he declared, as an example. But before he could pronounce a sentence, an elderly enslaved woman stepped forward, Maid Gilda, the same one who had once told Elias that fire remembers. She pointed a trembling finger at the colonel. "You punish him," she said, "and the land will burn again." Her voice cracked, But her words hit with the weight of prophecy. Duarte scoffed, but a flicker of uncertainty passed over his face. It was subtle, but everyone saw it, because deep down, even he felt it. The fire wasn't done, and punishing Elias would mean declaring war against something he could never control. After a long, tense silence, Duarte made a decision not out of fairness, but out of fear. He ordered Elias to be isolated, not whipped. Watched, not tortured. Silenced, but allowed to live. It wasn't mercy. It was self-preservation. And from that day forward, a legend took shape. Some whispered that Elias could command flame. Others said he was born during a lightning storm and carried fire in his blood. Children on nearby plantations spoke his name in hushed amazement, like he was a spirit who walked with burning feet. But here is the truth. Elias never set another fire. He didn't have to. The fire set him, permanently, into the memory of Pernambuco. Years later, when abolition finally reached the region, elders would still tell the story of the morning the cane fields chose a child over a colonel. They would describe how the fire bent like a living thing, how it spared the workers, how it circled the overseer, how it shifted its winds to shield one small boy standing alone in the smoke. And if you ever ask why this story survived, why it lasted longer than plantations, longer than laws, longer than the men who tried to bury it, I'll tell you, because people always remember the moment the land itself refused to obey. And they remember the boy the fire would not touch. Now breathe with me one last time. Slow, deep, present, because stories like this aren't meant to be heard casually. They carve something into you. And if you carry only one sentence from all of this, let it be this one. Some fires burn fields, but some fires burn the lives that fields were built on.